Okay, so this is mind-blowing. Jesus literally heals this dude. He's been unable to walk for 38 years. You'd think these religious leaders, they're supposed to be representatives of God, okay? They're supposed to be on God's side. You'd think they'd be overjoyed, but instead they go, you know what? Let's try to kill this guy. Let's try to kill this guy who just healed this man, all right? Why? Okay, we're provided with two reasons. One, because Jesus broke the Sabbath, and two, because Jesus called God his own Father. And here is a clear example also of people who had a theological grid, a certain understanding of who God was, and they saw Jesus and they go, okay, this guy doesn't fit our theological grid, so this guy must be an enemy of God. That was a natural conclusion. This guy isn't keeping the Sabbath according to our expectations. This guy isn't interacting with the Father according to our expectations. And so, therefore, this person is an imposter or an enemy or someone we got to get rid of. That was their conclusion. Their view of God was also too small. They didn't recognize that God could work outside of their expectations, and because of that, they were eventually responsible for killing God's own Son. You know, it's sad, isn't it? You know, this isn't just isolated to this text. This has happened throughout church history or just human history. It's sad that sometimes the greatest enemy of God is the people of God. The greatest enemies of God, the people who oppose God the most, are the people who think they're doing God's work, but they're actually not. Every generation has had these people, from the Old Testament to the New Testament to today. You have these self-appointed border guards of God's kingdom. That's what I like to call them. Okay, there are these, no one asked them to be these border guards, but they just appoint themselves to be border guards, and they think they're responsible for saying who's in and who's out, who's following God, who's not, who's on God's side and who's not. And they're often wrong. They're often kicking people out of God's kingdom when these people are actually doing God's work. And they might do it out of good intention sometimes, but oftentimes the reason why they do this is because, at the core, their view of God is too small. They have this theological grid of God, of who God is, and they cannot fathom that God could do things outside of their grid. You know, what I love about Jesus' ministry is that he is so unpredictable. He's almost always working outside of somebody's grid, somebody's expectations. And sometimes he even does things one way, here, and he does something another way there. One time he's healing someone who's blind, and he puts mud on their eyes. Okay, another time he heals someone who's blind, and he spits in their eyes. You might think, I'm just putting myself in this guy's shoes. Okay, you're spitting on my eyes. That's kind of gross. Okay, is this protocol? But that's what Jesus does sometimes. He does weird things sometimes, and it's unpredictable. All right. One time, a crowd tries to make him king, and he refuses. He goes hide in the mountains. And another time, a crowd tries to make him king, and he goes along with it. He rides this donkey in Jerusalem, and they're hailing him as king. You might wonder, why did he say no over here and yes over here? But that's what Jesus does sometimes. He's kind of unpredictable. Again, I mentioned this earlier. Sometimes people have zero faith, and so he doesn't do any miracles. Sometimes other people have zero faith, and he heals them. Also, he's unpredictable. Sometimes he goes to the temple, and he's teaching people stuff, and sometimes he goes to the temple, and he's flipping tables over, all right? And so if you're looking at him from afar, if you were a Jewish religious leader at the time, okay, you might go, okay, this guy is a weird dude, all right? He seems to be living kind of inconsistently, all right? It seems like he's hanging out with prostitutes. It seems like he was born out of wedlock. It seems like, he's reinterpreting the scriptures in progressive ways. Okay, he's making a mess in the temple. All of these things would not fit your theological grid, and it would be very natural for you to conclude this guy is not the Son of God. That would be a very natural conclusion. And sometimes I wonder, if I was a religious leader at the time, would I have had the same conclusion? Because Jesus was doing things that would be very odd to me. He was operating outside of my expectations. He would not probably fit my expectations for a Messiah, for a Son of God. Over the past several years, for a variety of reasons, I've had a lot of conversations, read a lot of books, and I think gradually I've been finding myself to be having more of what I would call a humble theology. And what a humble theology is, basically, you say, this is what I think, this is what I believe, This is what I think the Bible teaches, but I'm open to the fact that I may be wrong. And I'm open to the fact that God may do things out of my expectations. I'm not saying be wishy-washy. I'm not saying be compromised. I'm not saying don't take stances. I'm saying just have this humility to be able to say, maybe God can do things that I don't expect. Maybe God can work in ways that I can't predict. And maybe sometimes God can catch me off guard. Maybe I don't have all of God figured out. Sometimes we think theological certainty is like the highest of virtues. Theological certainty meaning this is what I believe, and I'm never going to question it, and I'm always going to debate people over it, and I'm going to show you why I'm right and you're wrong. It's almost like the more certain we are, the stronger our faith is. But I think sometimes the opposite is true. Theological humility sometimes requires a lot of faith because it requires us to say, you know what? I don't have everything figured out. I don't have God figured out. I don't know everything, but I'm going to trust in God anyways. I'm going to rely on Him anyways because He's the one in charge, not me. He has everything figured out, not me. He has all the facts, not me. And even though I don't understand everything, I'm still going to say, may your will be done, not mine. I think sometimes that takes even more faith.